Hello, welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to talk about is some agent loop tips and tricks, and more specifically we're going to look at how we can reduce our token usage. Let's go. Alright, so why is this important? So tokens have many impacts on an agentic solution. So this would include cost, which we're all interested in, but we're also interested in accuracy and reducing ambiguity. So this also becomes quite important. And throttling. Throttling is another piece to this as well. So when you're designing your agent, there's a few things that you should be aware of, and we'll explore in this video. How can we consolidate information before it gets sent to the model? And then how we can use parsing a document action to reduce unnecessary markup being passed to the model. So these could be things like Word documents or even HTML web pages. Now, the relationship between the content and the sort of verbosity of the content has a direct relationship on those other three aspects where we talked about cost, throttling, and accuracy. Now, from a cost perspective, we do get charged by the number of tokens that are sent to the model and returned. And so that is something where if we're sending extra information that isn't really relevant, we shouldn't include it. Because if we include it, we're just like sort of wasting cost, wasting gas, if you will. Now, from an accuracy perspective, we have this opportunity to introduce ambiguity because we could have similar terms that are included in this extra payload that actually just cause more issues. Let's think about, say, addresses. You could have a billing address, you could have a shipping address. Maybe you're only interested in shipping. But if you're sending both billing and shipping, there's the potential that those values get sort of mixed up. And as a result, you don't get the accurate results that you're looking at. The other thing that happens is that with these models, they typically have an upper threshold of the number of tokens that can be processed in a time frame, like a minute. So if you're actually burning or using more tokens than you need to, you introduce the risk of throttling, which will just like lead to a poor experience because maybe there's going to be retries and things like that will take place. So this is just on the Azure OpenAI pricing page. You can go ahead and do a web search for it. But just to give you a sense, right? So per 100 million tokens, this is what you can expect to pay. And, it sounds super cheap. And I think, a token is, it is something where several thousands of tokens could be used per turn, per iteration. So you might find that you use up those million tokens faster than you might think. So as you're using an agent more and more, these numbers naturally can rise quite quickly. And that's why this is important. Now, here's an example of throttling. So in this case, I'm using Agent Loop. I'm going to go ahead and connect to an Azure OpenAI model. Under the hood, we are calling an API. We're calling an API in order to go ahead and pass tokens in, and we're going to get tokens outputted as well. And then here we can just see that we're making too many calls. And the result of this was really because I had too much verbose information being passed. And that is why I was throttling really unnecessarily. And that prompted me to go make some optimizations to my workflow here. And this is what I really wanted to share with you so that you don't run into the same issues as well. So let's go ahead, let's jump into a demo, and I'll just show you a few sort of tips and tricks that you can actually go ahead and use in order to reduce your token count and improve your accuracy. All right, so on the channel, I recently shared a wealth manager use case, and that's what I'm using here. And this was just a great example of why we need to sort of manage these tokens more efficiently. So one thing to be aware of is that only the last action within one of these tool branches will have its information returned to the model. So if we look at this get account records action and we see this get contact records, these outputs will not automatically go back to the model. Now what I did do was I created a compose and I simply just went into it and had the full payload, the full output from both the account record and the contact record, and that was being sent back. Now, this was sort of overkill, if you will, pardon the expression, but I didn't need to send all of that information. The underlying payloads from the SaaS services, there's a lot of like extra info that we don't need, like what was the owner ID of this particular record? When was the record created? When was it modified? Things like that. That's not relevant to my use case, so why go ahead and send it? So what I did do here is I just went ahead and created a compose action, and I went ahead and just grabbed the individual attributes that I was interested in from the appropriate action call and just included the information that I needed. So this just really allows me to summarize and reduce the number of tokens that are being passed. And one thing to be aware of is that it's not just a single action that you need to be concerned about, because as I mentioned before, the throttling usually takes place on a per minute basis. So this call potentially could be light. I could have another call that's heavier, and the combination of those two could exceed the limit, and that could force the throttling. And what you're going to typically see is that the agent loop does a good job of recovering from it, but you still have the timing impact. So you could have an end user that's still waiting for something to happen that hasn't happened yet and wondering why. So that's why this is important, because it could have a direct relationship on the end user experience. Okay, so that's great. Now let's talk about another scenario. So we can see this here, which is relevant, but I think it's probably more relevant if we head over to this tool. This is going to go get a Word document from SharePoint, and SharePoint's going to return basically a document. This is going to include some binary content, right? So we've got a lot of formatting that takes place inside of a Word document. The model doesn't really care. Like, that's not going to actually, add to our scenario. It's not going to provide any value. So what we can do is use this parse document, and the parse document is one of those actions. You'll find it it's a built-in. If we go into built-in actions, and then what we can do is look for AI operations, and we should find it in there. So parse a document. It is in preview, so just a heads up on that. And this will do a good job of stripping out all of that extra content that we don't need. And in return, we're going to get the content that's just relevant for us. So that's a good use of an action. It's built in. There's no additional charges. But this is also going to limit the amount of tokens that are being sent. Now, similarly, in this particular branch, we are going to go ahead and call Google. So we're going to use the Google Web Search API. And as you can imagine, especially these days, when we do these sort of web searches, there's a million ads, and they have all this crazy markup and HTML and styling and all this stuff that once again is not relevant for our model. So we can actually go ahead and also use parse news here, and we can see some pretty drastic sort of reductions. It wasn't necessarily a scientific experiment, but when I was testing this, I found that this parsing would use 30% of the tokens that otherwise would be required if we just sent the HTTP request back to our agent and to our model. So that's huge. Once again, by keeping the payloads cleaner, we reduce the amount of opportunity for throttling, as we talked about, but also for ambiguity as well. Why add a bunch of extra data that can only, I was going to say de-rich our solution, but basically make it less valuable, because I don't think de-rich is an actual term. But those are a couple tips. Look for more. I'm going to do more of these as well, but do keep these in mind. Another option that you could do here, and maybe I'll make a video of that as well, is that we could use Data Mapper here. Perhaps we have some payloads and we want to take complex payloads and really shrink them down into sort of more succinct. We could go ahead and use Data Mapper as well. But just remember, it's always the last action from a tool call that will actually make its way back up to the agent loop. The intermediate calls, or the ones before, won't. So just keep that in mind. That's also another reason why maybe you want to go ahead and use a child workflow to encapsulate some of this as well, because then you can also just have its outputs being sent back to the model. So hope you enjoyed this video, and look for more tips and tricks as we move forward. Thanks.